You're wasting my time." He said it the way a man says something he has said 100 times before. Flat, final, already turning away before the last word landed. Officer Dale Pruitt stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Commons apartment complex on a Tuesday evening in October, his patrol car idling behind him, notepad already sliding back into his breast pocket. He had not written a single word on that notepad. He had not asked for a description, a time, a direction, a license plate. He had looked at the woman standing in front of him, calm, composed, hands visible at her sides, and made a calculation that took him approximately 4 minutes. Then he said those 5 words and started walking back to his car. The woman's name was Delia Carver. She was 43 years old. She was standing in that parking lot because someone had broken into her vehicle, smashed the rear passenger window, and taken a bag containing, among other things, 2 months of documentation she needed for a federal civil rights case. She had called 911. She had waited 22 minutes. She had greeted Officer Pruitt with a steady voice and a clear account of what had happened, and she had watched him not write any of it down. 3 residents stood near the building entrance. A maintenance worker paused at the edge of the lot. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And then Pruitt got in his car. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was who Delia Carver actually was. What she had spent 15 years building in silence. What was clipped to the visor of her own car, recording every second of that exchange in high definition. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. Because by the following morning, that footage would be playing on national television, and Dale Pruitt's 5 words would cost him everything he thought he had secured. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Now, here is what most people did not know about Delia Carver. She had grown up in the Eastwick neighborhood of Philadelphia, in a row house on Gray's Avenue, where the radiator knocked every winter, and the front steps had been repaired with mismatched concrete 3 different times. Her mother, Yvonne Carver, had worked the overnight shift at Temple University Hospital for 19 years as a licensed practical nurse, coming home in the gray morning light with her shoes off at the door so she would not wake the children. Delia was the eldest of 4. She learned early what it meant to carry a household quietly. It was Yvonne who gave her the phrase she would carry for the rest of her life. Not in a speech, not at a graduation. She said it one evening when Delia was 16, sitting at the kitchen table with a rejection letter from a summer internship program. The kind of rejection that does not explain itself. Yvonne set a cup of tea in front of her daughter, sat down across from her, and said, "Baby, you stay low and you build high. You let your work speak when you're not in the room." Delia folded that letter and put it in a drawer. Then she went back to studying. She was not loud about what she built. That was the thing people who underestimated her never understood. She had graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a degree in political science and a minor in criminal justice. She had earned her law degree from Georgetown, clerked for a federal judge in the Third Circuit, and spent the first decade of her career as a staff attorney for the ACLU's National Police Practices Project. For the last 6 years, she had run her own civil rights litigation firm, Carver Legal Group, with 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a caseload that included 3 active federal suits against municipal police departments in 2 states. She had won every one of those suits that had reached verdict. She did not advertise this. She drove a 7-year-old Volvo. She wore her hair natural, her clothes practical. She lived in Riverside Commons because it was 10 minutes from her office and 12 minutes from her mother's house, and because she had never believed that where you lived was a statement you owed the world. The body camera had been her idea, not the department's, hers. She had begun wearing a personal, civilian-grade camera clipped to her sun visor 18 months earlier, after a colleague described being pulled over 3 times in 6 weeks without cause. She had researched the device, purchased it, tested it, and documented its placement in a dated memo she kept in her office files. She wore it not out of fear, not out of anger. She wore it the way a careful person carries an umbrella, because the sky had a history. On the evening of October 14th, she had parked in her usual spot, gathered her things, and noticed the rear passenger window of her Volvo lying in pieces across the back seat. The bag that had been on the seat, a dark canvas tote with a reinforced base, was gone. Inside it, her laptop, a charging cable, and a manila folder containing printed exhibits for a deposition scheduled the following week in a case against the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. Exhibits that her paralegal, a young woman named Kezia Odom, had spent 3 weeks compiling. She had called 911 at 6:47 p.m. She had stood beside her car in plain sight and waited. Now, here is what Officer Dale Pruitt believed about the world, and about himself inside it. Pruitt had been with the Riverside City Police Department for 11 years. He was 38, broad across the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously questioned in a professional setting. He had received 2 commendations in his first 4 years, both for traffic enforcement and none in the 7 years since. In that same period, he had received 4 internal complaints, 2 for discourteous conduct, 1 for failure to file a required report, 1 for an allegation of discriminatory enforcement that had been investigated and, in the department's own language, not sustained. That phrase did its work quietly in a filing cabinet, and Pruitt had continued. He had a way of sizing up a call before he arrived. He did it on the drive over in the first 30 seconds of contact. He had a vocabulary for it that he used with his partner, Officer Mike Dolan, a man who laughed at Pruitt's assessments and rarely pushed back. The vocabulary was not written down anywhere. It did not need to be. It lived in the tilt of Pruitt's chin when he stepped out of the car, in the pace of his walk, in the decision about whether to take out the notepad. He had not taken out the notepad for Delia Carver. He had arrived at 7:09 p.m., 22 minutes after her call. He had parked at an angle, left the engine running. He had walked toward the woman standing by the damaged Volvo, calm, hands visible, and processed the scene in the way he processed most scenes in this part of his district. He had asked her name once without writing it down. He had looked at the broken window. He had looked at her. And somewhere in those 4 minutes, he had arrived at his conclusion. There was no crime scene to process in his estimation. There was no urgency. There was a woman in a parking lot making a report he was not going to pursue, and he had other calls, or said he did, and so he had said what he said and walked back to his car. 5 words, flat, already moving. The maintenance worker at the edge of the lot was a man named Curtis Webb. He was 51 years old, had worked at Riverside Commons for 9 years, and he stood with a push broom in his hands and watched Officer Pruitt get into his patrol car and drive away. Curtis Webb did not say anything in that moment, but he did not look away from Delia Carver either. He stood there until she turned and met his eyes, and he gave her a single slow nod. the kind that carries a whole sentence inside it, the kind that says, "I saw it, I know what that was." Delia nodded back. Then she took out her phone, photographed the broken window, photographed the glass on the seat, photographed the empty space where the bag had been. She filed a written report online at 7:34 p.m. She called Keziah Odom at 7:41 and told her, calmly, that the exhibits were gone and they would need to reconstruct them. Keziah asked if she was all right. Delia said she was fine. She did not say anything else about what had happened in that parking lot. Not that night. She did not need to. The camera on her visor had been recording since 6:47 p.m. It had recorded the broken window, the 911 call, the 22 minutes of waiting, and every second of Pruitt's 4-minute assessment. His face, his posture, his notepad going back into his pocket, and his 5 words, clear as a bell in the evening air. Delia uploaded the footage to a secure cloud drive at 9:15 p.m. She reviewed it once, sitting at her kitchen table with a glass of water and her reading glasses on. She watched herself stand still. She watched Pruitt's chin tilt. She watched the notepad disappear. She heard the words. She sat with it for a while. Then she forwarded the file to 3 people: her colleague and co-counsel Raymond Osei, a civil rights attorney in Washington, D.C., a journalist named Priya Mehta at the National Civil Rights Press Collaborative, and her own litigation file, time-stamped and logged. She did not post it herself. She did not write a caption. She sent it with a single line of context. October 14th, 7:09 p.m., Riverside Commons parking lot. My vehicle was burglarized. This is the responding officer's full interaction. That was all. She went to bed at 10:30. She had a deposition to prepare for. She had no idea what was already moving. Raymond Osei received the file at 9:22 p.m. He watched it twice, then called Priya Mehta directly. Mehta watched it once, then called her editor. By 11:00 p.m., the National Civil Rights Press Collaborative had verified the footage's metadata, confirmed Delia's identity and professional background, pulled Pruitt's public complaint history through a records request filed 6 months earlier for an unrelated story, and made an editorial decision. The story went live at 12:47 a.m. By morning, it was everywhere. And Dale Pruitt was about to find out exactly who he had dismissed in that parking lot. The second story begins in a different kind of silence. Not the silence of a parking lot at dusk. The silence of a conference room at 7:00 a.m., when a man is sitting across from his supervisor and the supervisor has a laptop open and is not speaking yet. Delia's firm, Carver Legal Group, occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse on Merchant Street, 7 blocks from Riverside City Hall. The office had exposed brick on 2 walls, a long oak conference table she had bought at an estate sale and refinished herself, and a wall of windows that faced east, so the morning light came in hard and clean. 4 attorneys besides herself: Raymond Osei, who worked remotely from D.C. but came in for trials; Fatima Okonkwo, a second-year associate who had graduated top of her class from Penn Law; Marcus Tillman, a former public defender with 12 years of trial experience; and Keziah Odom, who held the title of senior paralegal but functioned, in practice, as the operational center of everything the firm did. The firm had been founded on a principle Delia had stated plainly in the one interview she had given about it, 3 years earlier, in a small legal trade publication almost nobody outside the field had read. She had said, "We don't take cases for the headlines. We take cases because the record needs to be corrected. The record is a living document. It matters what's in it." She had meant it. Every case the firm had taken was documented with the precision of someone who understood that documentation was itself a form of power. Dates, times, names, recordings, where legal. Written accounts filed within 24 hours of any incident. She had built this practice not out of fear, but because she had learned from 15 years of civil rights work that the difference between a case that changed something and a case that disappeared was almost always the quality of the record. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Department case was the largest active matter in the firm's history, a federal civil rights suit alleging a pattern of racially discriminatory traffic enforcement across 3 years, supported by statistical analysis, 17 individual plaintiff accounts, and 18 months of discovery. The exhibits stolen from her car were not irreplaceable, but reconstructing them would cost Keziah and Fatima approximately 60 hours of work in 5 days. That was the bag Pruitt had decided was not worth writing down. Now, here is what the Riverside City Police Department's leadership did not know on the morning of October 15th, when the footage began circulating. They did not know that Meda's story had included, in its 3rd paragraph, a full accounting of Delia Carver's professional background, her Howard degree, her Georgetown law degree, her federal clerkship, her 6 years of civil rights litigation, her 3 active federal suits, her record at trial. They did not know that Raymond Osei had spent the previous evening pulling every public record associated with Pruitt's complaint history and had provided it to Meda as background. They did not know that the footage, clean, time-stamped, unedited, was already being shared by 3 national civil rights organizations before sunrise. And they did not know that Meda had quietly sent a copy of the footage and a detailed inquiry to the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, referencing the Millhaven case and asking whether the department wished to comment on the apparent theft of federal case materials from the vehicle of an officer of the court. That inquiry arrived at 1:03 a.m. By 6:00 a.m., someone in that office had read it. The conference room at Riverside City Police Headquarters smelled of burned coffee and the particular anxiety of men who have been caught in something they cannot immediately define. Deputy Chief Harold Stearns sat at the head of the table. Beside him was the department's public affairs director, a woman named Gwen Farley, who had her phone face down on the table and had not touched it in 11 minutes because every time she turned it over, there was something new on the screen. Across from them sat Officer Dale Pruitt, in his dress uniform, his hands flat on the table. He had been called in at 5:45 a.m. He had not yet been told why. Stearns cleared his throat. The sound landed like a dropped coin. He turned the laptop so Pruitt could see the screen. The footage was paused at the 4-minute mark. Pruitt's face in 3/4 profile, the notepad already going back into his pocket, his body already pivoting toward the car. The timestamp read 13 p.m. The view count on the article page read 412,000. That number had been accurate when Farley loaded the page at 6:48 a.m. It was no longer accurate. Pruitt looked at the screen. He looked at Stearns. He said, "I was responding to a property crime call. There was no—" "Stop," Stearns said. One word, flat, final. The same register Pruitt had used in a parking lot the night before, and something in that symmetry registered on Pruitt's face because he stopped. Gwen Farley turned her phone over, read something on the screen, set it face down again, and did not speak. What Pruitt did not understand, sitting in that room, was that the conversation he thought he was having about a call, about a property crime, about his judgment in the field, was not the conversation that was actually happening. The conversation that was actually happening was about something much larger, and it had been happening for hours without him, in offices and newsrooms and federal buildings, and it had arrived at a place he could not yet see from where he was sitting. Because the woman he had dismissed in that parking lot had spent 15 years learning exactly how institutions move when they are forced to move. She had not sent that footage to cause a scene. She had sent it to people who knew what to do with a record. That was the difference. That was the thing Dale Pruitt had not calculated in his 4 minutes. Priya Mehta's story had gone live at 12:47 a.m. with a headline that was precise and without embellishment. Civil rights attorney's vehicle burglarized. Respondent officer dismisses report in under 4 minutes. The story did not editorialize. It presented the footage, the timestamp, the complaint history, and Delia's professional biography in full. It named the Millhaven case. It named the stolen exhibits. And it noted, in the 14th paragraph, that the materials taken from Delia's vehicle were exhibits in an active federal civil rights suit against a law enforcement agency in the same state. That paragraph was the one that mattered most. By 2 a.m, the story had been picked up by 2 national wire services. By 3, it had been shared by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the National Police Accountability Project, and a former U.S. attorney with 41,000 followers and a habit of saying precisely what she thought. By 5, a deputy in the U.S. Attorney's Office had forwarded Mehta's inquiry to the Civil Rights Division with a single annotation. Flagging for awareness may have 18 U.S.C. implications. That annotation was not an accusation. It was not a charge. It was a flag. But flags have weight. Flags get read. Flags become meetings, and meetings become decisions, and decisions become the kind of pressure that moves institutions in ways that individual complaints rarely do. Delia had known this. She had known it because she had spent 15 years watching it happen from the inside. She had known that the footage alone was not enough, that it needed context, professional context, legal context, the Millhaven context, and she had provided that context to the right people, in the right sequence, at the right time. She had built that habit in silence, in the years before anyone was watching. Curtis Webb, the maintenance worker who had stood at the edge of the lot with his push broom, had gone home that night and told his wife what he had seen. His wife told him to write it down. He had the time Pruitt arrived, the time Pruitt left, the 5 words, the notepad going back into the pocket, and he had dated it and emailed it to himself so it would carry a timestamp he had not generated himself. He had not known he was creating a corroborating witness statement. But he had. When Mehta's team reached out to Riverside Commons residents the following morning, Curtis Webb was the first person to answer. He said 9 words in the recorded interview. "I watched the whole thing. She did nothing wrong." 9 words, and they were in every story by noon. Back in the conference room on the 7th floor, Deputy Chief Stearns was reading from a prepared document. Not speaking from memory, reading. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. and the paper moved slightly at the edges in a way Pruitt's eye caught and could not stop catching. The document was a summary of the department's exposure. Stearns read the relevant sections in order. The footage, the complaint history, the Millhaven connection, the U.S. Attorney's Office flag, the 4 national media booking requests that had arrived in the public affairs inbox since 4 o'clock a.m., the statement requested by 8 o'clock a.m. from the mayor's office. Pruitt sat still through all of it. His hands were flat on the table. His face had gone to the particular stillness of a man trying to locate the version of events in which he is not responsible, and finding that the geometry of the room does not support it. Gwen Farley spoke for the first time. Her voice was careful and precise. The department's position, as of this morning, is that the response to Ms. Carver's call did not meet the standards we expect of our officers. We are reviewing the incident. She paused. That is the statement we are releasing at 9 o'clock. I wanted you to hear it from us first. Pruitt looked at her. He looked at Stearns. He said, I made a judgment call. Stearns set the paper down. He looked at Pruitt for a long moment, not with anger, not with contempt, but with the exhausted clarity of a man who has been in rooms like this before and knows exactly how they end. Dale, he said, the woman you dismissed is the lead attorney on a federal civil rights case against a sheriff's department in this state. The bag stolen from her car contained exhibits for a deposition next week. The U.S. Attorney's Office received a media inquiry at 1 in the morning asking whether the theft of federal case materials from an officer of the court constitutes a federal matter. He stopped. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Pruitt said nothing. Stearns said, You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full review, effective this morning. The room held that sentence for a moment. Then Gwen Farley turned her phone over, read the screen, and said quietly, The morning show just confirmed. She'll be on at 7:45. She meant Delia Carver. The woman who had stood in a parking lot with her hands at her sides waited 22 minutes, said nothing she did not mean, recorded everything that was said to her, gone home, sent 3 emails, and gone to bed. The woman who'd been told she was wasting someone's time. Delia had been awake since 5:30. She had made coffee. She had reviewed her deposition notes. She had called Kazia at 6 to check on the reconstructed exhibits. She had answered Meta's follow-up questions by email, briefly and precisely. She had chosen her clothes with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. A dark blazer, a white blouse, her hair pinned back, her reading glasses on the table beside her phone. She had not rehearsed what she was going to say. She did not need to. She had been saying it in one form or another for 15 years. At 7:45 a.m., Delia Carver sat in a television studio across from a morning anchor named James Whitfield, who had been in broadcast journalism for 22 years, and who had learned, in that time, to read the people who sat across from him. He read Delia in the first 30 seconds. He saw the stillness. He saw the hands relaxed in her lap. He saw the way she looked at him directly, without performance, without the particular brightness that people wear when they are afraid of the camera. She was not afraid. She was simply there, the same way she had been simply there in a parking lot the night before, with her hands visible at her sides, waiting. Whitfield opened with the footage. He let it play in full, all 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and the studio was quiet while it played. When it ended, he turned back to Delia and said, Ms. Carver, walk us through what was in that bag. She did. She named the exhibits. She named the Millhaven case. she named the deposition scheduled for the following week. She explained, in plain language anyone watching could follow, what it meant that federal case materials had been taken from the vehicle of an attorney of record in an active federal civil rights suit, and what it meant that the responding officer had declined to document any of it. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She stated facts in the order they had occurred, with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years understanding that precision is its own form of argument. Whitfield asked her how she had felt standing in that parking lot when Pruitt said what he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I felt what I always feel when an institution fails to do what it exists to do. I felt the weight of it. And then I went home and I made sure the record was complete." The studio held those words. The broadcast reached 4.2 million viewers in its first airing. The clip of her answer was shared 180,000 times before noon. By then, the department had released its 9:00 a.m. statement. Gwen Farley read it aloud at a brief press availability in the lobby of headquarters, her voice even, her posture careful. The department acknowledged that the response to Ms. Carver's call had not met expected standards. It confirmed that Officer Pruitt had been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review. It stated that the department was cooperating fully with any inquiries from relevant authorities. It did not say Dale Pruitt's name, but everyone already knew it. By 10 a.m., 2 city council members had called for an independent review of the department's complaint adjudication process. Specifically, the process by which 4 complaints against a single officer over 7 years had resulted in no disciplinary action. One of them, a councilwoman named Adeyeze Nwosu, used a phrase that would be repeated in coverage for the next 3 days. Not sustained is not the same as not true. By noon, the mayor's office had announced the formation of a task force to review the department's response protocols for property crime reports. The task force would be chaired by an independent civil rights attorney to be named within the week. The name they eventually announced was not Delia Carver's. She had declined. She had a federal case to try. The internal review that Stearns had initiated concluded in 11 days. It drew on the footage, the dispatch records, the online report Delia had filed at 7:34 p.m., Curtis Webb's written account, submitted formally to the review board after a residents' rights organization contacted him directly, and the department's own documentation standards, which required a written incident report for all property crime calls, regardless of the respondent officer's assessment of merit. Pruitt had not filed that report. He had not filed it that night or the following morning, or in the hours between leaving the parking lot and being called in at 5:45 a.m. The review board found this in violation of department policy on 3 separate grounds. The review board also found, in examining the full record of his 4 prior complaints, that 2 of them, the discourteous conduct complaints, had involved interactions with black women. That finding was in the second paragraph of the summary section, in plain language, and it was forwarded to the City Council's Public Safety Committee as required by a new transparency protocol the Council had passed in emergency session 4 days after the footage went viral. That protocol had not existed before October 14th. It existed now. On October 26th, Officer Dale Pruitt was terminated from the Riverside City Police Department. The termination letter cited failure to file a required incident report, conduct unbecoming an officer, and a documented pattern of behavior inconsistent with the department's stated commitment to equitable service delivery. It did not use the word racism, but it did not need to. The record said what it said, and the record was now public, and the people who needed to read it had read it. His union filed a grievance, as unions do. The grievance was pending. But the footage was not pending. The footage was permanent. It lived in the archive of the National Civil Rights Press Collaborative, time-stamped and unedited, and it would be there when the grievance was resolved, and after, and always. Curtis Webb did not lose his job. He had been afraid he might, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he understood, from 51 years of living in the world, that doing the right thing and keeping your job are not always the same thing. His supervisor at Riverside Commons, a property manager named Elena Vargas, called him into her office the morning after his 9 words appeared in Maida's story. He sat down across from her, with his hands in his lap, and waited. She slid a piece of paper across the desk, a letter of commendation, signed by the property management company's regional director, citing his willingness to serve as a witness in a matter of public concern. Beside it was a handwritten note from the regional director. "This is exactly the kind of person we want representing this community." Curtis Webb looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket, close to where his heart was, and went back to work. He did not tell many people about the letter, but he kept it. He kept it the way you keep something that confirms what you already believed about the world, not triumphantly, but quietly, as evidence. The Millhaven case went to trial the following March. The deposition that had been in jeopardy, the one for which the stolen exhibits had been reconstructed by Kezia Odom and Fatima Okonkwo in 60 hours over 5 days, proceeded on schedule. The record's supervisor testified. The statistical analysis held. The 17 plaintiff accounts held. Delia Carver stood before a federal jury for 4 days and made her argument the way she made every argument, with precision, with documentation, with the particular authority of someone who has never needed the room to know her name before she speaks. The jury returned a verdict for the plaintiffs. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Department was found liable for a pattern of racially discriminatory traffic enforcement. The damages awarded were significant. The consent decree that followed required the department to implement independent oversight, mandatory bias training, and a public reporting system for all traffic stops, disaggregated by race, for a period of 5 years. It was the largest civil rights verdict in the Eastern District in a decade. Delia did not hold a press conference. She called her mother. Yvonne Carver answered on the second ring, the way she always did, and Delia told her what the jury had decided. There was a silence on the line that was not empty. It was full, the way certain silences are full, with everything that does not need to be said because it has already been lived. "Baby," Yvonne said, finally, "you stayed low." "I built high," Delia said. That was all. That evening, Delia drove to her mother's house on Grays Avenue in Eastwick. The front steps still showed the seam where the mismatched concrete had been repaired 3 different times in 3 different decades. The kitchen smelled of something warm and familiar, her mother's cooking, the particular combination of spices Delia had grown up breathing. And she sat at the same kitchen table where, 27 years earlier, a 16-year-old girl had unfolded a rejection letter and been given the only advice she had ever needed. She did not bring the verdict with her. not in any formal sense. She brought herself. She sat at the table and drank tea and talked with her mother about ordinary things, and the evening light came through the kitchen window the way it always had, and the neighborhood outside was the same neighborhood it had always been, changed and unchanged in the way that places are when you have been away from them and come back. She had come back. She always came back. Now, I want to say something directly, because this story is not just about Delia Carver, and it is not just about Dale Pruitt, and it is not just about a parking lot in October or a bag that was stolen or footage that went viral. This happens every day. In parking lots and lobbies and conference rooms and courtrooms and all the ordinary places where one person decides, in 4 minutes or 4 seconds, what another person is worth. It happens to people who are not civil rights attorneys. It happens to people who do not have a camera on their visor or a journalist in their contacts or 15 years of litigation experience to call on. It happens to people who have nothing but their dignity and their record and the quiet certainty that they did nothing wrong. And most of the time the world does not see it. Most of the time there is no footage. Most of the time the 5 words land and the car drives away and the crowd goes back inside and nothing changes and nobody is held to account. But sometimes, someone stays low and builds high for long enough that when the moment comes, the record is already complete. The documentation is already filed. The people who need to know already know. And the institution that thought it could dismiss the person in front of it discovers, too late, that it has been beneath that person the entire time. Delia Carver did not win because she was lucky. She did not win because someone rescued her. She won because she had been preparing to win for 15 years, in silence, in the discipline of her work, in the habit of making the record complete before anyone asked her to. That is what restraint looks like when it has been practiced long enough to become a way of life. That is what her mother meant. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly. How many people have you dismissed in 4 minutes or 4 seconds without knowing what they had built in the years before you met them? And if the answer is uncomfortable, that discomfort is the point. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever been in that parking lot, on either side of it? I want to hear it. Every week on this channel, we find the people the world overlooked and we tell their stories, because those stories deserve to be told, and because the record matters. If that means something to you, share this one with someone who needs it. And if you want to be here when the next story comes, subscribe. We will be here.